Well, Anna, good to see you. How are you? Well, by the way,
Good.
happy Valentine's Day.
Oh, happy Valentine's Day to all of you. That's true.
After this is done in the afternoon, I'm going to have to go get some flowers for my wifey.
Oh, that's nice.
You know.
Brian is in Miami, which is like in our signature fashion. We're
Of course.
spending it time. We don't care about. I mean,
Of course. Welcome to Hitmakers, How Brands Influence Culture, where every other week we explore culture influence and how brands create it.
I'm Anna Angelic. I'm author of Hitmakers and the Business of Aspiration and a brand executive.
And I'm Rei and Ana. I'm a creative entrepreneur and a founding partner of a global innovation firm based in New York, Tokyo, and Singapore called Rei & Co.
First of all, if you like what we're talking about, make sure that you like us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and YouTube, and pass it on to whoever you may like. And big shout out to Vanya Arsenov, our great producer, who makes sure that we sound amazing.
All right, let's get to it. So the topic that we are talking about, and it's a timely topic, especially in light of the Super Bowl that just happened about 5 days ago. So by the time this airs, it's about 10 days after the Super Bowl. And we're not necessarily talking about the event, but the role of, Anna, what you call spectacles, and specifically spectacle or hype. So do you want to talk about just in general what spectacles are and the role that they play, especially as they relate to brands?
Absolutely. And I think that what's really important here is to distinguish spectacle and hype in relation to culture. And I feel that in the past 20 years, maybe since the 90s, the culture was built through hype, which means something that starts in a subculture. Supreme drops, Virgil blocks Off-White and other sort of 3% interventions, streetwear brands, food trends, and so on. So that was kind of something that started very small and then slowly over time was built into something that the mainstream was hyped up about. But the necessary step is to first be very niche, very small, very analog, very offline, and very specific to a subculture or a community. Number one, spectacles started in mainstream. They're made to maximum number of people and maximum attention for a very short period of time. So you have the spectacle of the Olympic Games last summer. You have spectacle of SuperBowl, which is traditional annual spectacle. And then you have minor spectacles. There may be World Cup that's coming up. And like mostly these are sporting events, but there were also luxury fashion events in the form of the fashion shows, especially at LVMH, and especially with collaborations with like Rihanna or Pharrell's joining menswear and what he did for his inaugural show. So I think the two formats that are very fitting to do different moments in culture. How do you think about that, Ray?
Couple of things. One is, and this is more of a series of questions, just to unpack what we mean by hype versus spectacle and making sure that we're talking about the same thing. So hype could be a trend, whereas a spectacle, do you associate spectacle with an event? Does it always have to be an event?
It doesn't have to be an event, but what is important about spectacle is that it involves advertising, PR, celebrity, and media. Hype usually involves a product, a behavior, mood, taste. Spectacle is completely manufactured by advertising, media, PR machinery.
Right. Yeah. So it's done with some kind of either motive or an intention by somebody or some organization to create attention.
It has to be staged. It has to be staged.
Yeah.
So Olympic Games are staged. Pharrell Fashion Show was staged a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
Super Bowl is staged. So and it's covered by mass media and all sorts of media involve the celebrity. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So you said
It doesn't actually happen like hype does.
Yeah, hype could happen organically. It could also happen accidentally,
Always, exactly.
right?
You very rarely can engineer hype. You absolutely can, but then you're nearing the spectacle because when
Right,
it's
right, right, right.
PR and marketing and media, then it
Yeah,
becomes something that has more to do with, how should I say? It's more like advertising.
yeah, yeah.
Something that is very organically cultural.
Do
Yes.
you think this is an old example, but do you think something like the Barbie movie a couple years ago, was that a hype or was that a spectacle?
Oh,
Or
that's a
both?
spectacle.
That's a spectacle.
Barbieheimer, all the memes around that. It's anything that captures mass attention at one point of time.
Yeah, yeah. But
Hype
in that case,
never catches
yeah,
attention of the mainstream until it's over.
right, 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 right. But like in the case of say Barbie as a franchise and a Barbie as a movie, what ignited that spectacle was not a physical event like the Olympics or the Super Bowl, but it was a piece of IP or piece of content, i.e., the movie. That was sort of
I
the big.
also think it was a lot
Oh,
of like red carpet. It was a lot
oh,
of
right, 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 right. Yeah,
advertising. It was the entire marketing around it. So
yeah.
it doesn't need to, like, it has to be staged. And everything about Barbie movie was staged.
And or to
It
use
was
the
a
word
gigantic
manufactured.
PR push that cost inordinate amount of money.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So just at the beginning, as I mentioned, we had the Super Bowl last weekend. It was definitely a spectacle. Yeah, there was some hype around it before, but definitely after, especially the hype around the halftime and the feud between Kendrick Lamar and Drake and things like that. And just to talk about the Super Bowl a little bit, and I'm not a huge football fan, and I don't even watch the Super Bowl. Do I care? Not really, to be honest. Not really. I could, like, if it wasn't in my life, I wouldn't necessarily miss it. But it's one of the very, very few mass media spectacles or mass media events that brands do tap into. And I might be biased, but this year, at least the talk or the chatter after the fact, and then at least what I'm catching and what I'm hearing, I feel like 90% of the conversation this year is about the halftime show and Kendrick Lamar. There was Taylor Swift. Last year was she was kind of the it girl. She was the topic of the talk. But this year, she even got booed, I guess. And it's the spectacle that was the halftime, and then maybe a little bit about different brands and the commercials that air during the event throughout. But the main topic is not even the game that happened between the two teams, but really only like 10-15 minutes of that 4-hour ordeal that is catching all of the air, I feel like.
Yeah, but that's always the case because the game itself, it's like it's artificially made to last that long because of that, with everything that happens in between, all the ads and so on. So when the game is good, of course, the game is going to be talked about. This time, the game was not good in a sense that it cleaned the house.
Yeah.
So, it was not like, I think it's like, if the game is like, it's unfair to say, but I do think that what made that halftime so impactful was the mood was right for that. Kind of like the feud that you're referring to, the nature of that song and how controversial that was. And then Kendrick Lamar himself, who is very outspoken, and then those Celine bell bottoms that he was wearing. And then also Serena Williams, who did the dance a few years back and was really like, immature and professional, but now that was kind of the main thing.
Right.
I think it was like a mix of a lot of different things that kind of made it like the most talked about thing. Very a lot of entry points into that.
And I thought what I found interesting, again, like I don't care too much about the Super Bowl, and I don't pay that much. I mean, I pay some attention to the TV commercials and I pay some attention to the halftime show. But I feel like this year, just the depth and the complexity of the halftime show and what was embedded into the performance and culture around it, I found it actually quite interesting from a culture perspective and sort of the state, not just the event as a spectacle, but the ripple effect, both in terms of, hype as well as like the historical context of it was, it made me think more than the previous Super Bowl games or the halftime shows. And I was trying to think, thinking to myself, like, oh, when was the last time that an event, a national or sometimes international event like the Olympics, let's say, a manufactured event made me think, not just the event and the superficial, like the feud between the two celebrities, I could care less, but like the cultural context or even the historical context and either subtle or explicit statements that the artist, the musician or even the producers around the event was making. I found it interesting, and I found myself like Googling things and trying to find the layers of meaning. And then again, like I can't remember when the last time that I came across what is a piece of entertainment, but actually making me think the larger context around it.
I think that's also the outcome of what kind of culture you pay attention to just in your life. Because like, there are a lot of subcultures where you can get like draw into like that. I know you said you don't care about feud among celebrities and so on, obviously. But I think that Kendrick Lamar in itself is a figure that is not worthy of attention just in general. And I think that now he himself went from just maybe music culture into mainstream culture. So I think that is something that you are reacting to, as probably a lot of others like you who were not necessarily that steeped in the music.
Yeah.
So that's not, but again, that's like also byproduct of that spectacle. The other thing that I think it's important to unpack here is basically like, and this is not new, like last year before, and so on, we've been talking about how sports is the last spectacle, mass spectacle that actually unites people, in a sense that you don't have arts or design or even entertainment, even the big movies anymore. It's kind of like, well, this is one thing that we can all agree on. This is the one thing that globally and individually we can say, hey, we appreciate this performance and striving and sort of the drive and the entire emotion around sports. It's like so human. It's indisputable universal. I think we had like events before that, like Grammys or even Oscars, not in past 20 years. But, there were events that were film festivals, music festivals, they played that role. But I don't think that's that's not the case anymore.
Were you in the US during the Olympics last summer, or were you in Europe?
Here.
You were here.
I was in Paris before Olympics and then after, but not during.
Yeah. So I was in Japan last summer.
Okay.
Between July and the first week of August. So when the Olympics were happening. And it is a spectacle, but it's kind of a different spectacle. The way that the Olympic Games are broadcast in Japan is very different from the way it's broadcast in the US. In the US, the network, it's an advertising event, right? So like every 5 minutes there's a commercial break. And I find Olympics unwatchable in the US because like every 3 minutes the commentators, the announcers are making a big deal about whatever. And whereas in Japan, it's broadcast through the national television network, which is like BBC of Japan called NHK, and there are no commercials. So you can actually watch the sports. You can actually watch the games. So I was like staying up past midnight every day to watch the Olympics because you can actually watch it. Whereas, 5 years ago, when I was in the US, I mean, it was just unbearable. And no wonder young people aren't watching the Olympics on TV, but like the TV stations are having to hire influencers to distribute the content. But like when in the US, did you notice that the Olympics were as a spectacle? Did you feel that it had a cultural impact, or was it just like it was kind of in the background and people sort of forgot about it?
No, it had immense cultural impact, but no one watches TV. No one watches,
No.
like Olympics on TV, and very
Yeah.
few people were actually there. I mean, people who are like in Europe, they were. But I think it's not the point that you watch Olympics on TV and it's a spectacle. No, that's the whole thing. It's like an event that is happening, but because the nature of social media is such that we communicate through memes, through snippets of visual content. That's what made it really global, is how those moments like French pole jumper or
I do remember that.
those were the moments exactly that were widely shared. And those were the ones that actually got so many people into it because they were so human. And I think that's the point. Not the point, I can watch uninterrupted, for an hour and enjoy, like synchronized swimming.
Yeah. Yeah, but I guess what I'm saying is that like the pole vaulter or the memes are sort of like the snippets, just a tiny sliver of a much, much bigger event, right? And those are, definitely like enjoyable, memeable moments. Personally, like if I wanted to enjoy the game, I find it impossible. But I'm talking about the Olympics specifically. I find it really difficult to do it, even if you're not sitting in front of a TV, even on mobile. They make it difficult to watch the purity of the games. Yeah. And then like Super Bowl is kind of the same thing. Like football itself, the game itself is almost the side dish.
It
the main dish is
background. So I do think that was a similar thing with the Olympics, with the opening ceremony being. But then also, like, I think very few people are going to be like, you have soccer fans, for example. They're going to watch, or tennis fans, or you have synchronized swimming fans, and they're going to watch. They're going to find the content they want to watch in its entirety and uninterruptedly and so on. But there are very few and far in between. And when you think about that, then you say, hey, there is again that fragmentation of who is interested in what. I think like people are interested because that's what everyone else was talking about. So memes were those social objects that connected people. And I do think that was the whole idea. We are now, something is happening now that the entire world is paying attention to, and it's paying attention to because we are sharing those snippets of content. So again, almost like the games, like you never send, like NBA never sends the best players, even like soccer, they never send their best players because, there's summer, they're resting, like you don't want them to get injured in something like that. So the value is symbolic.
Yeah.
Because the value you don't go there to see the actual record-breaking XYZ. No, you go there to see who are the heroes. When you see who are like athletes sponsored by Adidas, by Nike, by On Running, and so on. That's what almost most, like you create new celebrities, you create new personalities that you root for.
One thing that you mentioned earlier, sports is the last thing that we can agree on. I would also say, I agree with that point. I would also say that you don't have to agree on things, but you can share the love for the same thing. So, let's say politically people have completely different views, but say the team that they root for is the shared
that's
love.
what I meant. Like we agree that sense that this is worthwhile pursuit and something that
so you can kind of transcend the differences.
There is nothing divisive about human striving and pushing the boundaries. I didn't mean there is nothing to agree on when you're watching two teams, or when you're watching someone breaking a record in running or something. It's kind of like agree is wrong word, you're right. It's like unifies us.
It definitely unifies. So other than sports, I mean, we talked about something like Barbie as a spectacle, but were there or are there any other spectacles? Well, fashion show like the Fashion Week, for instance, that's a spectacle that also may be changing in terms of the way it's being presented these days. But what are other types of spectacles that you pay attention to?
Well, there is entertainment spectacles. There used to be red carpet or awards
Yeah.
shows. And again, the same thing. People want moments. They want human moments that are happening throughout the ceremony. Who won, who lost, how did they react to it? They go on red carpet. What did, they don't, So that's kind of like Oscars used to be a big spectacle. But again, I'm talking like a different generation.
Yeah. Like
And
10,
that's the
20
whole
years ago.
point. And then you have art fairs as spectacles. Then you have like feats of like, the guy who walked between two twin towers when twin towers were still there.
Oh, yeah.
They were kind of like the moments that everyone pays attention, or the Red Bull.
Yes, yeah, that's true. Yeah, sure, yeah.
Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, where Red Bull sent a rocket in space or someone.
Yeah.
So they were like kind of those moments when you kind of put a lot of money in it. Like I think Formula One is becoming an insane spectacle in the United States.
It is.
Because they have like now amazing sponsors and LVMH part of it, and there's synergies there. But then the amount of money spent on it, like Las Vegas and then Miami, that is becoming sort of a spectacle.
Yeah. What about hype? Hype, you said hype happens more organically and somehow even accidentally. But can you manufacture a hype?
Obviously, but then that's like a PR and marketing thing. You can manufacture if you put a lot of money behind it. That's it. It's going to last as long as you're putting the money in.
Yeah.
I would love to, if I can remember, any hype that was sort of engineered in a sense and actually took off. Like a lot of brands today, they are trying to create hype because they're paying, who are the right content creators, who are the right influencers, what are the right seeding context. That's hype because 99% of brands don't have money for a spectacle.
Right. Yeah. So in terms of engineering a hype, would you say something like the presidential campaign a hype? I mean, there's a lot of money,
again,
a shit ton of money behind it.
I would not confuse the hype with the marketing campaign and PR push, because you can hype certain things up. And yes, I think there was a hype around Kamala's nomination for a minute.
Yeah.
But that died down.
It died down, yeah. It didn't last.
Really, like if you have a hype around new sneaker releases, you have a hype around new movie, you can have a hype around the book, you can have a hype around the person, but it's not a hype if it lasts only a month.
Well, what's a recent hype that you think was successful, whether it was engineered or not? Is there a hype that comes to mind?
I do think there is a lot of hype around running in a really best possible way, or like around their shoes, but that's like overnight success, 15 years in the making.
Yeah.
And I do think that there is a hype around their like, their Roger Federer, their Elmo campaign. So I think they're one of those rare brands that people are rooting for.
Sure.
Again, that doesn't happen unless they had the products. What do you think?
So on that point though, do you differentiate between hype and where's the line between where does marketing end and where does hype begin?
When people organically, authentically, uncalled for, recommend each other a product.
I see.
They profess love without being paid to do that.
Yeah.
When they say, oh my God, I love Elmo, or oh my God, I love like Cloud too, when they're telling each other that.
Sure.
But especially, I think hype is going to become even more important now that we have analog, offline, members only secret things. Mainstream is for spectacles, for marketing. And then hype is like, you heard from someone about this restaurant that has amazing food, but there's no wait list. There is you can't make a reservation. That's where the hype is.
Yeah. This one's a little bit, so when you ask me an example of a hype, it's a couple years old, but when Uniqlo Uniqlo's mini bag, the
Uh-huh.
round, that they didn't put a lot of marketing behind it. They didn't spend any money on it, marketing. And it was one or two different TikTokers, not planned, but they sort of quote unquote hyped up the product. And it became two videos became around the same time, unrelated to each other, massively viral. And the sales took off like you wouldn't believe. It's the most successful product, I think, that Uniqlo has ever had. And this was in 2022 or 2021. And yeah, the hype is not quite at the same level, but it's still selling like crazy for them.
Amazing.
Yeah. And they didn't put any money behind it. And by the way, this is an accidental hype, not an engineered hype.
Mm-hmm.
What's peculiar or what's interesting is that it was 2 years after the product was released. So the product was available in 2019 or 2020. And it took about 2 years for a couple of girls to discover, oh, this is, so it looks small, but you can put so much stuff in it. And then it erupted this hype, and it's lasted for quite a while, for about 2 years or so. Yeah, maybe it's not being talked about at the same level, but still, it's one of the best-selling products on their site. So that's
Great
one
example. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. So I think just to wrap up, what's interesting about this conversation, spectacle versus hype, skeptical. I'm skeptical about spectacle. No. Spectacle is manufactured, and it usually centers around ad, PR, media events, and those are engineered, sort of top-down approach. Whereas hype tends to be more organic, starting with subculture, people sharing the memes, the little things, and then bottom up, ground swelling. And then maybe when the hype is over, that's when media starts to notice, oh, this thing was cool. And then, by that point, people have moved on to another hype. But yeah, I think this juxtaposition of spectacle being an engineered top-down approach versus hype being a ground-up, underground approach that's organic. And I think that the key is, how do you engineer hype? That's probably the secret that a lot of people are trying to
because I
crack.
think the most important thing about hype is that it comes from a genuine love for a product, idea, trend, aesthetics, look, personality. So it's a genuine idea that a lot of people share. Yeah. And then media comes and amplifies it. Spectacle is like that. It's telling you what to pay attention to. It's telling you what to like. It's like grabbing your attention. One is like, you pay attention because you identify with it. Yeah. And the other is you grab attention because you can't escape it.
All right. Shall we go to the hit list?
Yes.
Should I go first?
Sure.
Well, you asked me to go first last time. All right. So my hit list is related to the very topic we just talked about. Do you know who Hamish Hamilton is? So I didn't know who he was. And I looked up. So he was the director of the halftime show for the Super Bowl. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And like I said earlier, I did find this year's halftime show more interesting intellectually and academically than I ever have been interested in a halftime show ever, because it just had more layers to it than any of the previous shows that at least I can recall. And so I looked up, who produced the halftime show for Super Bowl, and the two names that came up, one was Hamish Hamilton, who's a director of like real events, and he's been directing halftime shows, Oscars, those spectacles. And then he's often paired with Jesse Collins, who's a super producer, entertainment producer, who's also a long-time event producer, who's produced halftime shows of the last few Super Bowls, as well as other shows. So again, they're not necessarily household names, obviously. I had to look them up. And I was very intrigued by the creative production aspect of the halftime show, more so than I ever have been in the previous 20 years that I paid attention to Super Bowl. Amazing. So that's my hit list.
And for me, again, related is that a lot of people were praising that Nike ad. And in a sense, it does make a comeback for Nike, at least
Yeah.
in terms of putting athletes at the center,
Yes.
letting them
Yeah.
being the heroes, and sort of positioning Nike as someone who is facilitating that, but like let the heroes speak for themselves. And it was, while it was not terribly new in terms of format or storytelling, it really resonated emotionally, which is something that Nike has not done in a really long time.
Yeah.
And I just think it's noteworthy. Speaking of
Yes.
the ads, because Super Bowl ads, you have On Running Head, Elmo, and Federer, and that was very cute. But then Nike was like, "Hey guys, we're back. Stake in the ground," you know?
Yeah. I didn't watch all of the ads. I watched a couple of them. The Nike one, I totally agree with you that it's not necessarily new in terms of the way they've done these types of commercials in the past. It's actually a very, and I say this with respect because I know a lot of people who work at Rei and Ana at Nike, but it's somewhat based on a formula that's worked for them before. Yeah. But I don't mind it. I didn't mind it at all. The ad was so, I thought it was so powerful. I watched it so many times. I posted on LinkedIn, and it's interesting that some people, not a lot, but few people, and I don't mean to make this about male versus female kind of thing, but a few women said that it didn't do it for them. And some of them even said that they found it condescending, which
Well, that's so strange. I didn't. I found it like right at the heart of the matter.
I thought
in
so.
Athletes' own words. And so I just think that they really, like when you take the format out of it, it's almost like you can be more innovative if you repeat the format, if you don't worry about like, format innovation. So it just felt like very true to who those women are as athletes and people.
So
it's not very modern in a sense, It felt like something that they would do on a TikTok video, They just did it in this ad format.
Yeah, I mean, it had been 27 years since the last time that Nike aired a Super Bowl spot, back in like 1998.
Wow.
And
I'm glad that was successful. And at least it seems to have been successful comeback after 27 years in terms of reaction.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see if this hype would last or become a hype.
That's a great point.
Yeah,
that's
3 months, 6 months from now. Where is Nike in terms of their business? So we can revisit that.
We can revisit that, but that's a great point and a fantastic way to wrap this conversation up. Thanks for everyone who's been listening. Again, thanks to Vanya, our producer. If you like the show, like and share it. We are on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Thank you so much, Ray.
Only 5 stars. Only 5 stars.
5 stars only, guys. 5 stars.
That's right. All right. Thank you. See you in 2 weeks.
Until next time.